Hello and welcome to One on One. I'm Vernon Ramazan. I'm pleased to say my guest today is actually a fairly frequent guest on the program, Renee Cummings, criminologist.
Nice to be here, thank you.
Thank you so much for coming back, Renee. We've been talking about bullying the past few days. I know it's something that you take an interest in and you have some experience with in studying it. Let me start by asking you, what are the root causes of bullying?
Well, bullying is an extension of violence, and we're seeing in our society a very socially toxic environment, and toxic environments are environments that sort of spoon the kind of violence we're seeing. What we're also seeing is children who are acting out, children who lack the discipline, also children who lack the skills to deal with anger, to deal with relations with other individuals. It's unfortunate that our Ministry of Education does not really have any standards or protocols in place to deal with something like bullying. And we're not only seeing bullying in the schoolyard or in the classroom, but we're now seeing an extension of that, given the fact that we have the highest levels of telecommunication available to us as a society. Bullying is now being extended to the internet. So you're getting a variety of expressions of bullying. There are text wars where you have individuals who are texting another individual. They're sort of ganging up on them. So it's like you're ganging up using your cell phone. You have impersonation when you create a profile saying that you're someone else and you're not that person, and you're using that profile to sort of defame or taint the reputation of someone else. And then you're seeing things like bash blogs, or chat rooms where people are setting up chat rooms to bash other students. So it's really, really a very contentious and difficult time for children right now.
But why is it? Does it empower the bullies?
Well, it is. I mean, bullying is about power. It's about power relations. It's about the imbalance of power. And in society, we all want power. You know, some of us choose jobs that are powerful. Some of us have money that makes us powerful. And even with children or with young people, with teens, in marriages, in relationships, there's always that power dynamic. So bullying is just an extension of that power. And the bully is the one who is probably seeking some sort of attention, who's not getting the kind of attention that they need, or who in their own relationships with their parents or their siblings or other individuals feel disempowered.
And of course, we're talking about minors here. So these things have to be handled very delicately, don't they?
Most definitely. I think, again, and we're seeing with our criminal justice system, our legal system, our family courts, there are no best practice protocols in there. We don't have a juvenile delinquency office. Our Ministry of Justice is supposed to supply that. It hasn't. The Ministry of National Security does not have a youth violence policy. We don't have social workers and psychologists and school counselors or guidance counselors who understand juvenile delinquency and understand how to treat with juveniles who are now, you know, in breach of certain basic day-to-day protocols.
It's a worldwide problem as well, isn't it?
Well, indeed, it's a worldwide problem, but in the United States, in Sweden, in Norway, there have been, in Europe, across Europe and the North America, there have been extensive studies and research put in place. And what has filtered down, or what has distilled, is that schools need to empower young people to create their own organizations, to create their own prevention programs. Teachers are supposed to be working with students to create prevention programs. In school, it's about education and it's about awareness, but our schools are totally devoid of that. And I think that's where the Ministry of Education and, of course, Social Development and the People's and National Security, the Ministry of Justice, keep missing the boat, because what you see is what is reflected on the juvenile level when it comes to violence, if there are no interventions, easily replicate themselves into adult criminality.
Now, of course, recently there was a video posted on Facebook of two young people, and it was an act of bullying that has, of course, captured the public's attention, and we've seen some reactions to it that are not very pretty either. But in fact, it's almost hypocritical of us to point at that video, because we must have known it's been going on all the time, hasn't it? That's just one example.
Well, definitely. I mean, it's
and
been
played out for the cameras to some extent.
Exactly. It's been happening in our school system. We've had situations of violence. I mean, bullying has been happening since we were children. But what you're seeing now, in society, given the fact that we're now living in Trinidad and Tobago in a very violent society. And the kind of violence we're seeing is interpersonal between individuals. And yes, it's been happening, but you would think that after all these years, certain protocols, certain measures, certain standards would be put in place to treat with it. But the total absence of any type of prevention programs in the secondary school system, in the primary school system, speaks to the fact that the powers that be are not grasping what the issue is. So we're trying to deal with crime on a national level, but we're not dealing with the root, where it starts, with the young people, and making them unlearn the kind of violence, because violence comes from the home. That's the first interaction that we have with violent situations, violent experiences. So we're really not treating the root causes, but yet we're creating or hoping to create policies to deal with criminality. But you have to nip it in the bud.
But as a nation as well, we tend to almost regard bullying as part of childhood.
Well,
as almost an acceptable thing, and you have to go through it, and that's just normal. I went through it as well, for example.
And that is, it's not the right approach. It is not the best practice approach. Yes, you know, we all grew up in a situation where we're bullied, but what we're seeing now is violence. It's real violence. If we take the video on Facebook that, you know, became very popular in a very short space of time, yes, you're seeing the anger, but you're also seeing the victim, you know, not responding. So you're asking yourself, because if it was, you know, you and I, and I am there slapping you, you may have a reaction. You may cry, you may scream, you know, but there was no reaction. And you see children, particularly young people and young boys, you know, they internalize. They internalize sometimes a lot, and they're sometimes afraid to express themselves because they feel, I mean, if you go and you tell about bullying, you're not being a man, or you're not, you know, you're not taking responsibility. So yes, there may be a little bit of mild bullying that makes us all grow up to be who we are, but when you see that expression, that intense expression of violence, these things must be put into check.
Now, you mentioned the internalizing there. If we look at the US recently, there's been a spate of teenage suicides as a result directly of bullying, and in almost all the cases, in fact, 6 or 7 of them, I think, so far. It can really be damaging to someone's psyche, can't it?
Of course it is, because...
And especially if you're a bit different in some way, because you're already dealing with that internally.
Exactly. So what you're seeing, particularly the ones in the United States, you're seeing, again, people having certain relations, and then people are using the internet to shame. And with internet shaming, it's 24/7, because once you put something up on Facebook or on a blog or on any kind of site, it's there for people to see. Now, particularly when we look at the US experience, and we're looking recently with gay and lesbian youth who are really being traumatized because of who they are and the fact that they've chosen to express themselves in an alternative way, as a way some may
well, in many cases they can't help it. That's just, they just are obvious to people that they are.
But they are who
LGBT,
they are.
yeah.
And we really need not judge, we need not discriminate, because we all define ourselves as who we are. But you know, the thing about it is the fact that people are now using, particularly the internet, to shame individuals. And it does affect you, because not everyone can deal with that kind of shame. Not everyone can deal with that kind of exposure. Not everyone wants themselves out there. And particularly when it moves to the point of suicide, it means that a lot of them are not receiving the help that they need, because again, they don't feel that level of connectedness to really speak to adults or to tell people what's going on, because you know, adolescent and teenage years are the years that we are grappling with ourselves.
Right.
We're trying to come to terms with who
We're
who
weaker
we
psychologically
are.
to some
Exactly,
extent. Right.
and it's your genetics, it's what's going on with your body, it's your feelings, and then these things, you know, I mean, just growing up in general is tough when you think about it.
But to have a 13-year-old actually reach the point of hopelessness where they kill themselves.
Well, that shows that society has definitely failed the individual, because when a child or when a young person, a teenager, an early teenager, does not feel a connection with anyone or does not feel safe, it's also about safety and feeling safe enough to express yourself or safe enough to tell someone what's going on with you. It means that we keep missing the mark as a society. I mean, as you know.
Do you think Trinidad and Tobago has kids that kill themselves as well as a result of bullying?
You know, I don't know of any cases, but sometimes when you do read the newspaper,
You
there
have
are
to read
some
between
stories.
the lines
You read
sometimes.
between the lines, and you pick up that there are certain things that were at play that made this individual, you know, feel as though this was their only recourse, and that should never be like that.
Of course, psychology is near and dear to your heart as well. Let's talk of the long-term repercussions for someone who's been bullied. How can it manifest itself later in life?
Well, definitely you have the psychological effects. You have things like post-traumatic stress disorder. You also have that individual not being able to develop into the total individual that they want to be. But it's not only the victim, it is also the victimizer, because if the victimizer continues with that pattern of expressive violence, that individual is on a life course to a particular type of criminal lifestyle that may make them, you know, come into contact with the law, and of course it spoils their life forever. Also, you have situations that people who bully enter into relationships where they become the abuser, and people who've become victims continue re-victimizing themselves in the relationships that they seek. So the victim and the victimizer are not separate. They experience the same kind of trauma, the same sort of psychological distress, the same types of feelings, and this is why we need, particularly in Trinidad and Tobago, to have interventions. And interventions are really, you know, primary, secondary, and tertiary. Primary, broad scale to everyone, secondary to the at-risk youth, and tertiary to the groups that have already experienced violence. And we really have to look at our school system, look at our education system, and ask ourselves, are we on the right track? Are we providing our students with the support that they really need?
Well, the answer speaks for itself, doesn't it?
Well, definitely.
We're not.
We're not, and it was very amusing recently to see an effort by the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of National Security to teach students, which is, it's very novel, to teach them about disaster management, risk, earthquakes, and flood, but yet you have no programs to deal with school bullying. You have no programs to deal with sex education. You have no programs to deal with self-esteem. You have none of the things that they need. So you're creating your own list of priority without dealing with the relevant stakeholders who are the young people themselves.
Is it that we're afraid to confront some of those issues?
I don't think we're afraid.
Well, certainly with the sex, we're rather hypocritical when it comes to that.
Well, definitely we are. And I always say, just even returning home to Trinidad, I realized how sexual we are as a society. Everything has a sexual innuendo. The music is very sexual. If people are having a conversation, I mean, about something as basic as parking a car, it becomes a very, you know, sexual conversation. Everything, there's that duplicity. But whether or not we're able to look at ourselves in the mirror and be honest, I think where we fail as a society is honest conversation. We cannot have honest conversation with each other because I don't know what we're searching for, but I think there is that fear, and it comes with a lot of people being dishonest about their own experiences.
Well, we have certain taboo subjects we don't like to talk about as well. And speaking of which, if we look at that whole Facebook experience, you and I are Facebook friends, below the video there were comments, and it quickly turned into a racial discussion. Where that came from, I don't know.
Well, the thing with that video, when I first saw it, I didn't know if it was a real video. So, because, you know, sometimes people put these things out.
Nor did I, yeah.
So I really didn't pay attention to it. It's only when I saw someone else make a statement on their page that I really went and I looked at the video. Now, I didn't read the comments because I realized everything becomes so polarized. And it just goes to show the level of